So welcome everyone, we're here with our cueing video. I'm going to go through some of the common cues that you'll hear me say and help to explain what it is that I mean biomechanically or anatomically in the body, what's happening when I'm saying those cues. So the first one we're going to start with is the chin to the back of the throat, or stacking your head over the rest of your spine. A lot of us have a more forward head posture that comes from looking at a computer all day or just gazing out in front of us. So when that happens, we put a lot of load into our neck. So when we say draw the chin towards the back of the throat, it's the idea of restacking the head over the spine. So to show you what that looks like, I have Mr. Flexi with me here today. When you have your head forward, it just sits in front of the rest of the spine. So it creates kind of the slouching and sinking feeling in the back of the neck. When we say draw the chin towards the back of your throat, we're activating deep cervical muscles that help to hold the head stacked over the rest of our spine. The other thing that you can imagine is just creating length from the bottom of the neck through to the base of the skull as you pull back. So you're moving from this back bent position and lengthening the neck as the head comes back over the rest of the spine. What that looks like in our body is this. We're taking the head from a forward position and we're asking to draw the chin towards the back of the throat, activating muscles deep within our neck and restacking our head over the rest of our spine. Our next cue is broaden your collarbones, or widen through the front body. So there's a difference between widening and broadening versus squishing things together in the back. Your collarbones, or your clavicles, are just here at the top of your rib cage. So what we want to imagine is that we're widening them through to the sides of the room versus taking your shoulder blades and squishing them together in the back. So that will look quite different. As I stand to the side, as I broaden through my collarbones, I might come from a forward shoulder to a broader, wider stance versus taking my shoulder blades and squishing them together. So broadening, we stack the head and we just broaden from a forward shoulder to a wide stacked open front body. The next cue you may hear me say is either drop your sternum or lift your sternum. So depending on your posture, that cue will be different for each person. If you tend to be a person that has a more arched back this way and your breastbone here kind of sticks up to the sky, then you might hear me say draw your ribs in or drop your sternum so that it's moving towards your pelvis. If you tend to be a more rounded, hunched forward posture, you may hear the cue lift your sternum, and that means to take that breastbone and think about gently lifting it upwards towards the sky so that your shoulders fall back into place, which helps with the broadening of the collarbones. The next one you may hear me say is hinge at your hips. So often when we're doing forward bending, people will move through their back versus their strong hip joint. So what that looks like is this. With his feet planted on the floor, we have a ball and socket joint here called our hip. When we bend forward, we don't always want to bend through our back. We want to actually move, if we can, through the strong hip joint. So when the leg is planted, what that looks like is the body is going to bend forward, the shape of the spine stays the same, and you're just moving here at your hip joint, the ball and socket. So that's hinging at your hips versus rounding through your back. The next cue, I'll keep my skeleton here, is lengthen through your spine. So if your back tends to be a little bit more arched, that's quite compressive to the vertebrae in the back body here. So sometimes you'll hear the cue lengthen your spine through your low back, and that simply means to create this sensation of lengthening. You can see the ribs come from being behind the body to stacking more over top of the pelvis. That's quite different to tucking the tailbone under, which puts too much stress and strain here on the low back. So what that looks like from the side is if we're in a kind of a more arched position here, if we think about creating length through our low back and taking our pubic bone and lifting it towards our nose, that helps us to stack our pelvis in a better position. What we don't want to do is tuck our tailbone under, because that makes us very tight through the gluteal muscles here and gets the spine over elongated, which is hard on the discs. Our next one is turning the leg bone in the socket. So if you hear me say turn the leg bone in the socket, we're referring to this long leg bone, your femur, and how it turns in the ball and socket. So your leg bone can turn inward and outward, both directions. When we turn our leg bone inward and outward, that can help to change the position of our foot and changes the angle that the knee loads over the foot when you're bending it. If your knee tends to turn in when we're doing squats or lunges, then what you want to do is imagine turning the leg bone outward in the socket so that it restacks the knee over the center of the foot. So what that looks like in the body is if I put my hands on my pelvis and I bring my leg bone out, I should be able to turn that long leg bone, the ball in the socket, without turning my pelvis. So it's a ball and socket motion. When we do that, it allows us to really load our leg in a more proper fashion. So if we're squatting and we're down and our knees have gone together, then we can imagine turning the leg bone outward in the socket so that it stacks up over the center of your ankle. Our next cue you'll hear me say is your knees over your second toe. So your big toe is your first toe, the toe beside that is your second toe. When we're going into a bending motion, so when we're coming down and up, we want the center of our knee to track over that second toe. So this is where we may have to turn our leg bone inward or outward depending on how the knee is tracking. So when we're bending, we're watching to make sure that we're not going in this way or we're not going too wide that way. So you can change that by changing your hip angle. The last thing you'll hear me say is draw the arches up in your feet. So from the ball of your big toe, which is here, through to the front of your heel, there's an arch system in your foot. So when you're standing, you want to make sure that that arch system is working along with the strength of your hip joint. With the foot on the floor, sometimes you'll feel the inside of the foot is collapsing to the midline, which takes the knee, turns it in, and then turns the hip in as well. So when we're standing with our feet, we'll lift our toes, we'll spread them apart, we'll place them back down, and we'll imagine that arch running along the inner border of your foot from the ball of the foot through to the heel. If you feel like your feet are collapsed to the inside, your knees will turn in, or if you notice you're standing on the outsides of your feet, you want to plant through your big toe, the ball of the big toe, while feeling a lifting energy through that arch. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask me on the Facebook page or via email, and I'll be sure to answer them as soon as I can.